So anyway, I'm going to start by handing the table over, or the part of the table over, to Gary, who I was so happy to have known you so many years ago to study with you at some yoga journal conference somewhere, some hotel somewhere. But then to get to know you as we had our lineage conversation last year. So we're going to start with, Gary, what is lineage and why does it matter to you, and why does it matter overall?
Well, thank you for inviting me to be here, and I'm really happy to be with you all. So I'll just jump right in. In the tradition of yoga, historically, there are two words that are primarily used to describe lineage. One is sampradaya, which means the flow of the tradition, and the other is parampara, which is the line that goes from teacher to student. And the foundation of all of this yogic teaching actually comes through revealed or received teachings. The word is aparusheya, which means no human author. It means that it was received by teachers. It wasn't created. And then it was passed on through texts like Vedas and Upanishadic teachings, and then through lineages, the teachings from one teacher to the next generationally. So these teachings have been passed on generationally. So lineage, for me, reveals the teachings, the context of the teachings, and the scope of the teachings and their relevance to our lives, my own personal life. I met my teacher and joined this lineage long time ago in the early 1970s in what was then called Madras, India. And I was young. I was 19 when I met Krishnamacharya and his son Deskachar. And so it wasn't something that I created. I was just like a sponge absorbing the teachings, and they were the ones that taught me where the tradition came from, what it was about, the scope of it, and what its relevance is for my own personal life. So it's not something that I've created, it's something that I've received. And of course, the lineage is living, so it is creative. And we were taught that we need to adapt these teachings to make them relevant for the individuals or the culture that we're working in. My teacher was from South India, and I was living in the United States. So he always said, you're the one who needs to adapt these teachings to make them relevant for your students in the culture that they're living in. But it's rooted in the knowledge base and the core perspective and teachings that have been passed on generationally for thousands of years. So for me, that's the basis of lineage. Yeah, I know that we'll talk more about it, but that's sort of what I would start with.
The words, I want to make sure I didn't miss one. I heard you talked about like the details and the context, the scope and the relevance. Those are the three main like words. Was there one other word? Because I like the way you separated it out that way, like the kind of full details,
well, then, yeah, the knowledge base that the tradition came from, the context of it, its practical relevance for human beings,
right?
And then the actually part of lineage is the science of transmission. Right. Transmission is the word that's used to pass teachings along, and of course, we will probably talk a little bit later about practice. I mean, the essence of the yoga tradition is practice-based. So the teacher has to practice it to integrate it and to make it an embodied living experience. And then on that basis, he can be a transmitter and continue the parampara, continue the line of transmission of these teachings. Again, it's not dogmatic, it's living. And it's the role of any a competent teacher to adapt the teachings so that they have practical relevance for the practitioners.
Yeah, in the time and the space and context that it's offered. Monique, what about you? What is lineage, and what does it mean to you? Why does it matter?
Well, I 100% agree with everything that Gary just said, and like you appreciated the discernment in the different like constituent elements of yoga, the knowledge, the scope, the relevance, the tradition from which it springs. Um, I think what's different, or what I would add to that, is my particular experience. I think the other thing, when we talk about transmission, the other way I would say that is lineage is important because it offers, or it reveals, community and connection. So it reinforces that this is about the engagement and the sharing of information and the transmission. So when I was a young art student, I had history of Asian art and history of Buddhist art. I traveled to India. I also took yoga my last semester in college, but I was searching for someone who could explain things to me. And when I got home, I shared that interest with my mother, who said, I think I know someone who teaches yoga at her house, someone I went to school with. And she introduced me to Maya Breuer, who is a Kripalu yoga teacher. And for many years, I took yoga at her home, and it was such a, I had never been in a yoga studio. It was a very different way to be introduced to the practices. Everything was relevant to where I was at and what I was searching for. And it was such a complete engagement of student and teacher. And then I went to Kripalu, and then I became exposed to the much larger flow of tradition and history that is held in that space. And where this sort of overlaps or intersects with what Gary shared is I also came into it when the tradition was held by the community and not by one central authority. So last time we spoke on this, I was joined by Robert Mulhall, who is our current CEO, and in that way holds the position of leader, and invited me because we are sort of embodying the spirit of shared wisdom at Kripalu, and that we all have something to offer to the story. So that's my part of the story and my point of view. I never met Swami Kripalu, and did once take a workshop with Amrit Desai in New York City, a yoga nidra, but it was well after he had left Kripalu and Kripalu had transformed. So lineage is also very personal, as each of us has a connection to a community, and then that community is very likely feeding back to a much deeper and older source if we trace it back. And that's sort of, I think, a beautiful gift and a very meaningful part of lineage that does infuse the practice with a deeper meaning, because it's connected to something that is so vast, really. So that would be what I would say in addition to Gary's beautiful overview of lineage.
You know, I appreciate that, Monique, and I don't know if we're going to be able to get back to this. I hope we do. But one of the things that really struck me in the Kripalu lineage conversation in December that we have, and so for those on the call, we have a site that links back to all of these previous conversations. So if you're going for an hour walk, it's really worth putting it in your ears or watching it. But you know what I walked away with, particularly from the Kripalu conversations, was the activist aspect of the lineage as it is going into 2022. And when I hear all these words about community and this personal connection, I was just writing some words down. The tradition held by the community, I just find it so interesting that at least that was one of the most salient aspects that I heard you and Robert talk about last December as meaningful to the Kripalu lineage. So we're gonna hopefully get more into that. But John, it's so good to see you. How are you doing? So I did full disclosure. I've been a student of John's for many years, and I'm glad to see you because I'm glad this multidisciplinary approach, because that's where I've generally speaking been coming from for a very long time. What is lineage to you in the Iyengar yoga method, and why does it matter?
Well, thank you, Kim, for doing this, and thank you both, Gary and Monique, for your comments. As Monique said, I really appreciate Gary's erudite overview of these aspects of the conversation about lineage, and I really appreciate, Monique, you're bringing in the idea of community to this sangha and how important that is in particularly these days. Lineage to me, well, there's the lineage of just yoga from the very beginning, from the sages who sat by the rivers and sat in the caves and just went so deeply into themselves that they experienced their experiences and felt compelled to share those experiences.